Our society has been crafted by the thousands of generations who came before us. To discover their history is to realize the foundation of our civilization. In spite of all of our technological advancement and centuries of effort, some things still elude us. As such, here are 3 archaeological mysteries which have confounded experts. I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. The 7th chapter of the book of Genesis describes how God caused it to rain in order to submerge the earth and annihilate all who lived in sin. Only righteous Noah, who heeded God's warning, was able to save himself, his family, and specimens of all living creatures from the flood by building an ark. While scholars generally agree that the Genesis flood narrative is based on sources from the Babylonian-Assyrian region, the seeming similarities between this and other great flood stories are harder to explain. According to current research, more than 250 flood accounts have been assembled from cultures all over the world. Usually sent by a deity or group of deities, a great flood is often recorded as an act of divine retribution for the shortcomings of mankind. Such a great flood is recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The poem, which is considered to be the oldest known great work of literature, details the trials of the legendary demigod Gilgamesh, who, if he existed, was probably a Sumerian king who reigned sometime between 2800 and 2500 BC. Towards the end of his journey to divinity, Gilgamesh met with a wise man who had survived an unimaginable flood. According to the epic, he had been tasked by the ocean god to build a great ark where he, his wife and family, along with the craftsmen of his village, baby animals and grains, would survive the cataclysmic deluge. After 12 days on the water, the wise man opened the hatch of his ship to look around and saw the slopes of Mount Nisir, where he rested his ship. Further accounts of a great flood appear in Hindu mythology. Vishnu is said to have appeared in the form of his fish god Avatar, so as to warn the first man, Manu, of an impending catastrophic flood. Vishnu ordered Manu to collect all the grains of the world and build a giant boat. In some forms of the story, all living creatures are also to be preserved in the boat. In his fish form, Vishnu guided Manu's boat to the safety of the high grounds of the northern mountains, which have been interpreted as the Himalayas. Amongst Celtic tradition, there is yet another similar story. Heaven and earth are described as having been 2 great giants. Heaven was said to have lay upon the earth, smothering its people in darkness. A group of brothers, unhappy with this darkness, cut heaven into many pieces. Heaven's spilling blood was said to have caused a great flood, of such magnitude that all humans, except for a single pair, were killed. The 2 who survived the deluge did so because of the benevolence of a titan who provided them with a ship. Pictorial records of ancient Incan rulers show that a flood rose above the highest mountains. One god was said to have sent a great flood to kill humans who did not respect him. Different variants of this story exist. In one, all created things perished, except for a man and a woman who floated in a box. In another, those who lived in the highlands of the Andes Mountains survived, as they were not given over to evil. In Greek mythology, Zeus was so angered by the constant war-making of the bronze race of humans that he unleashed a great flood as punishment. Knowing that these waters would wipe out humanity, the Titan Prometheus told the secret to his earthly son, Deucalion, advising him to build an ark. After 9 nights and days, the water began to recede, and the ark settled on Mount Parnassus. Flood stories are also found in Norse mythology, in the lore of the Maya peoples, in the traditions of some tribes of Native Americans in North America, and the Aboriginal tribes in southern Australia. While scientists are in agreement that an Earth-encircling flood could not have possibly taken place, no one can agree on how so many diverse cultures share similar stories of a cataclysmic flood. Scholars have attempted to individually explain various flood myths. The Sumerian narratives, for example, are argued to have been the result of localized flooding in what is now modern-day Iraq. Within a few months of one another during the 1928-29 excavation season, archaeologists at 2 southern Mesopotamian sites announced the discovery of flood deposits, which they identified with the Great Flood described in both Sumerian sources and the Hebrew scriptures. In the decades which followed, enough evidence was uncovered to more confidently conclude the dramatic scale of the flood. Evidence of flooding was found at the sites of numerous ancient Sumerian cities. A layer of river sediments was radiocarbon dated to around 2900 BC, roughly concurring with the estimations of Gilgamesh's supposed encounter with the flood survivor. However, some experts dispute the claim that this is evidence of the flood described in Genesis and other texts. In 1993, a Russian research ship found remains of freshwater plants in the Black Sea. Today, the sea is known for its brackish, saline waters. As such, the discovery of freshwater plants did not fit with the current conditions of this great body of water. An international team of experts, including the man who located the wreck of the Titanic, was sent to investigate further. Traces of a former shoreline were discovered, suggesting an abrupt 500-foot rise in water levels in perhaps less than a year. The Black Sea's former shorelines, and those who had inhabited them, would have been wholly submerged as seawater cascaded in from the Aegean Sea. More than 60,000 square miles of land were swallowed up, at an approximate rate of half a mile to a mile per day. For that to occur, titanic torrents of water must have poured into the Black Sea at a rate of some 400 times that of Niagara Falls. Naturally, one can see how such a catastrophe could have been recorded as a consequence of divine wrath. Radiocarbon dating of the transition from freshwater to marine organisms put the time of this event around 7,500 years ago, or 5,500 BC. Those involved in the research at the time presented the possibility that the traumatic collective memory of the Black Sea flood could have inspired the Epic of Gilgamesh in the centuries which followed. However, a leading authority on Gilgamesh at the time was quick to dismiss this claim, highlighting the wide separation of the two in geography and time. Others have suggested that the Black Sea flood of 5,500 BC is evidence of the biblical flood itself. Despite the involvement of some of the greatest international minds, no one has been able to agree upon a conclusion. And even if the Black Sea flooding hypothesis is correct, and the flood is the one described in the book of Genesis, how is it that the indigenous peoples of North and South America and Australia, as well as others besides, knew of it? Even after many years of investigation, so many unanswered questions remain. In March 2010, Émile Fradon, a modest peasant farmer from central France, died at the age of 103. To his grave, he took the secret behind one of the most controversial archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. A discovery which put into question the very origins of the written word and the paternity of European culture. On the first day of March 1924, a not yet 18-year-old Fradon was ploughing his family's field in the hamlet of Glozel when his cow stumbled into a hole. When he and his grandfather Claude looked closer, they discovered a mass of broken stone, under which lay an underground chamber. Within, they discovered pottery fragments, carved bones, and a peculiar clay tablet covered in bizarre characters that neither of the two could decipher. The family requested a subsidy for excavation works to be carried out, but were refused by the regional authority. With that disappointment, it seemed as though the discovery would fade into obscurity. However, the following year, news of Fradin's unusual clay tablet reached the ears of the physician and amateur archaeologist Antonin Mollet. By the end of May 1925, Mollet began the first of his investigations. Within the first 2 years alone, he had amassed some 3,000 finds. Unimaginable wonders continued to pour from the earth. Further runes inscribed in the same strange characters, arrowheads and shafts carved in bone, rings bearing Kabbalistic symbols, human bones, and hermaphrodite idols. All in all, some 100 tablets bearing inscriptions were claimed to have been unearthed at Glozel. The meaning and origin of these inscriptions still remained elusive. Initially, the site was thought to have been Gallo-Roman. However, the nature of some of the artifacts uncovered suggested a far older provenance. Representations of reindeers were engraved on some of the objects. As such creatures had long been extinct in the area, Mollet proposed that the site could date back anything up to 17,000 years. If true, what was being proposed would revolutionize archaeological knowledge. In September 1925, Mollet published a report on his findings, crediting the young Émile Fradin as his co-author. The French Archaeological Academia were instantly dismissive of Mollet's report, the mere creation of an amateur and a peasant boy. It was not until the next year, when a number of distinguished archaeologists were invited to visit the site, that the discoveries at Glozel began to receive support. Museum curators, members of scientific academies, and a famous archaeologist conducted their own excavations and were impressed. However, the tone of the debate soon changed. Accusations of a hoax began to circulate. A famous archaeologist changed his summation of Glozel from a sensational find to outright forgery. Writing in October 1927, he stated that everything is false except the stoneware pottery. At this point, the Glozel discovery exploded into controversy. The Archaeological Academia were divided. Was the entire site fraudulent, the invention of a bored, barely literate peasant boy? Or did the finds at Glozel represent the rewriting of history as we know it? Certainly, some learned men began to speculate that the discovered tablets suggested that the earliest writing had originated not around 3300 BC in the Middle East, but around Glozel, several millennia earlier. Other theories included the site being a witch's lair, the indecipherable alphabet, perhaps an occult language. Experts were confounded and could not agree upon an explanation. An anthropological commission was appointed to assess the site's authenticity. After a 3-day excavation, they published a report that condemned the discoveries, with the exception of a few pieces of flint axes and stone, as fake. What followed was a legal academic war. Fradin filed a suit of defamation against the curator at the Louvre. The president of the French Prehistoric Society filed a complaint of fraud against Fradin. A further committee was sent to investigate the site. This time, its authenticity was confirmed, with the conclusion being drawn that the site dated back to the Neolithic period. Yet, confusingly, the chief of the Criminal Records Office in Paris, after raiding the site and confiscating many of the artifacts, damned the whole affair as a forgery. Ultimately, the law would side with Fradin. The complaint of fraud was overturned, and the curator at the Louvre was found guilty of defamation. Legally exonerated, Fradin returned to his farm, where he would tend a museum housing many of the discovered artifacts until the day he died. Mollet continued excavations at the site until 1938. The Second World War and a change to French law, making any further excavations after that point impossible. In the 1970s, discussion as to the validity of the runes flared up anew. Since that time, various samples had been re-examined, this time with the aid of modern science. Determined to be the oldest find was a bone plate from 17,000 years ago. Further bones dated back 15,000 years. The mysterious tablets, however, were found to be considerably later, having been fired around 600 BC. Regardless of this, there are still those who claim that it is possible that additional tablets once existed and are now lost to us. Indeed, claims have been made that similar tablets have been found in China, with characters that are almost if not entirely identical to those found at Glozel. These tablets were found in the ruins of a prehistoric village, which some have estimated to be 8,000 years old. Another instance is the supposed findings of yet more similar characters in Australia. As such, many retain the belief that the Glozel ruins conceal secrets of our prehistory. Attempts to decode the peculiar alphabet continue into the present day. Scholars from across the globe have presented various possible linguistic origins, from Semitic to Sumerian to Basque to Proto-Turkic to Celtic to Iberian and so on. No one has thus far been able to agree on a conclusion. With Émile Fradon's death in 2010, it seems as though we may never know the truth about the Glozel ruins. The Hypogeum of Hal-Saflieni is one of the most mysterious places on Earth. A labyrinth of rooms, it is thought to be an underground burial chamber and sanctuary of the ancient Neolithic temple-building culture of Malta. It is estimated that more than 2,000 tons of stone would have had to have been removed from under the ground to construct its many chambers. Its construction began around 3600 BC and would continue expanding until around 2500 BC. Yet, these dates have been disputed. In fact, there have been arguments over almost every point regarding this structure, including whether or not the Hypogeum was even built at all, or whether the temple was fashioned into purpose out of a network of caves. Its funerary function has likewise been questioned. Then there are the human skulls discovered within, including some whose supposedly natural elongations science has no answer for. In every way, the temple is a mystery. One of the most enigmatic elements that any visitor will encounter is its sound. The walls were designed with an incredibly advanced knowledge of acoustics. To give an idea of the Hypogeum's auditory quality, it has been described as akin to standing inside of an enormous bell. Indeed, in one of the rooms, the Oracle Chamber, it was found by a Maltese composer and an Italian research team that sound resonates at precisely 110 Hz. How the original builders of the temple knew how to achieve this has confounded experts. Oddly, this frequency is very similar to the frequencies found in other ancient chambers around the world, including Newgrange in Ireland. Research has found that this frequency provokes the brain to process its surroundings with a greater emotional or spiritual feeling. And this is certainly what the entirety of the complex conveys, a sense of deep spirituality. Here, a number of Mother Goddess statues have been found, indicating that the temple may have been dedicated to the worship of the Mother Goddess, represented by an enormous woman with incredibly wide hips. A common practice in prehistory, examples of this form of worship have been found to date back as far as 25,000 years. Yet, in the Hypogeum, worship of the Mother Goddess goes beyond common practice. Indeed, there is nothing else like it. The masterpiece that is the Sleeping Lady statue is unusual, with the Mother Goddess customarily being depicted upright. This has led experts to question the secretive nature of the temple, which shows little sign of being a place of public worship. Located deep within the earth, it has been speculated that this exclusive temple was akin to being in the womb of the Mother Goddess herself, and may have been used by occult groups. One of the temple's greatest sources of mystery lies with the strange elongated skulls which were unearthed there. It has been suggested that these skulls once belonged to a class of priests, referred to as serpent priests because of their unusual appearance. Research conducted on one of the skulls has shown that, unlike South America and other places where people would artificially elongate skulls, it was naturally elongated. This may have caused incredible pain during infancy, but would have also most likely helped provoke visions, which would have no doubt increased one's status as a holy figure. Holiness being associated with elongated skulls can be found elsewhere, with people suffering from such afflictions also serving a priestly function in places such as ancient Egypt. Science cannot explain these skulls being naturally elongated, as nothing similar exists in the present day. So where did this unknown race of people come from? But then again, perhaps a better question would be, where are the skulls now? Of the 6,000 to 7,000 skeletons uncovered when the temple was first discovered, only 6 skulls survive, being securely held by Malta's Archaeological Museum. The rest have disappeared. The condition of the human remains found within the temple is mysterious in other ways too. A decade after the temple was first discovered in 1912, Themistocles Zammit, the renowned godfather of Maltese archaeology, led an excavation of the site. He described the position of the human remains as follows. Bones and pot shards were intimately mixed, disjointed, and confusedly massed. Very few bodies were found lying in a natural position, and no special arrangements such as trenches were met with anywhere intended to receive a body. In one cave, not a single skeleton was found lying with bones in position. At least 120 skeletons were buried in a space of 3.1 by 1.2 by 1 meter. This is enough to show that regular interment was out of the question, as not more than 12 bodies could be laid in such a place. In a separate publication in 1912, Zammit described how no complete skeletons came to light, and that bones lay in complete confusion through the soil. This indicates something rather peculiar. The more mainstream academic position is that this is not too dissimilar from how other ancient cultures would scrape the flesh off the bones and throw them into a burial pit. However, even in such burial pits, the bones were never in such a confused mess. Some sort of organization and respect is always found. By contrast, the Hypogeum pit was found to contain animal bones from hedgehogs and frogs tangled up with the bones of human beings. Not only that, there is evidence to suggest that all these bones were sealed up at once. So, did some great catastrophe befall the people of Malta? Dr. Anton Misford, a Maltese physician and amateur archaeologist, has proposed the idea that a great flood occurred in Malta, which sank parts of the island forever. The bones in the Hypogeum are from those humans and animals who were swept up in the torrential waters. Their lifeless bodies rushed into the subterranean temple. This would explain the chaotic arrangement of the bones. To further evidence this point, some of the remaining bone fragments were radiocarbon dated in 1999 and found to be from around 2200 BC, around the same time that Malta's temple building culture suddenly ceased. This is also the same period that many accounts of the Great Flood date back to. Another interesting theory is that Malta has been inhabited since the Paleolithic era, between 10 to 18,000 BC. This is several thousand years before what is currently accepted. If this theory is correct, it could mean that the Hypogeum itself is much older as well. Certainly, cave paintings found there do suggest an earlier origin. Not only that, but a pair of what is said to be Neanderthal teeth were found in a nearby cave, which some chemical tests place in the Paleolithic era. Could the Hypogeum, then, be the result of thousands of years of human cultural evolution, each era leaving its trace with the sculpting of every room? Or did those who constructed it have knowledge of acoustics and architecture far beyond what is commonly accepted and associated with these periods? What secrets did the Serpentine priests keep in this temple? We will most likely never know. The Hypogeum could very well link us with millenniums of hitherto unknown art and architecture. Indeed, it may very well hold the secrets of our civilization. Thank you so much for watching, and an extra special thank you to our patrons. Your support, as always, means the absolute world to us. If you cannot wait for my next video, then why not watch another suggested on screen now?